Alright everyone, welcome back to Talking Soccer. I of course am your host, Justin Horniker. Today we're going to talk about NWSL, women's soccer, and the Sally Yates report that was made available yesterday. And I spent over 24 hours just really diving into it. I wrote a story on my Medium page, I'll post that down below, and I'm going to use that to really highlight a lot of this video. Because ultimately, the Sally Yates investigation into US soccer, into the NWSL, into this culture of abuse is over 300 pages long. It starts off with a heavy hitter saying that all three of the Chicago Red Stars, Portland Thorns, and Racing Louisville ownership groups did a good job in obfuscating the investigation. For whatever reasons, and we'll get into that later in the video, they all decided to not be forthcoming with the investigation. I think that speaks volumes to what comes out in subsequent pages of this investigation and some of the fallout that we're seeing today and ideally into this week, next week, into the months to come, because we need to just tear this whole fucking thing down if we're going to rebuild. And I think Becky Sauerbrunn said it eloquently, talking about the report today, saying that anyone who owns a team was in a front office that contributed to this culture of covering up everything that came forward. And there are a lot of names in this that have to answer some questions and have straight out lied to both the team, the public, the supporters, in an attempt to gaslight the entire league. But Becky Sauerbrunn said that any person involved should be away from the league, should be out of the league. And I think that's the attitude that not just the players, but the fans, the media, we have to bring to this discussion. Anyone involved in this report, anyone named implicitly in this report, needs to be ousted from the league and from US soccer. That's the only way that we're going to be able to move forward and just really, from the top down, rebuild US soccer culture. So let's get into it a little bit and keep in mind that US soccer culture thing. We'll touch on that later as well. So Sally Yates was hired in October of 2021, October 3rd, so about a year ago today. And during that year-long investigation, a lot had come out into the public, mostly involving Rory Dames, following Christy Holly, who is also wrapped up in this investigation. And it's really hard to put a scope onto this. And I think Sally Yates says it in the report, because it was asked about other investigations into Houston Dash, into Gotham, former Sky Blue FC, which is also mentioned heavily in this report, and of the former Utah Royals. Of course, Utah Royals were forced to sell because of Deloy Hansen's racially insensitive remarks and some harassment from his camp. He was forced to sell both Real Salt Lake and Real Monarchs, the USL team, and the NWSL squad Utah Royals, which of course become Kansas City Current. Also important because FC KC, the group before the Royals, so FC KC went to Utah, came back to KC, that ownership group is also implicated a bit as well, talking about players being lied to about playing conditions, and just in general, the level of trust around the league. Players getting lied to left and right throughout this investigation, which should make you feel some things, that if players can't trust ownership, if players can't trust their coaches, who can they trust? They need the league to exist, yet they can't trust anything about the league throughout this time. So the report itself, not really surprising. Of course, I put out my Rory Dames video, my Artem Whistler video last week, and a lot of what we talked about in this video was talked about in the report. There are, of course, some new things and chilling day-to-day details that we didn't exactly have beforehand. To read it all laid out to you in 300 pages is pretty incredible. The depths at which players were harassed, coerced, lied to, racially targeted, sexually abused, completely corrupted, any attempt at cover-up from those currently in charge at US Soccer. Obviously, Sydney Parlow-Cohn was also mentioned in the report, but on the receiving end, when she was in the Portland Thorns organization, we'll talk about this a little bit later because I have a specific instance in the article that I'll quote from. But know that the reason that she seemed to push this investigation forward is because she had some inside information, i.e., had firsthand experience of the abuse going on, the harassment going on inside Portland's front office. So Yates said the investigation revealed abuse in the NWSL rooted in a deeper culture in women's soccer, beginning in the youth leagues that normalizes verbally abusive coaching and blurs boundaries between coaches and players. I've spoke to this in some of my running videos, my track and field videos in the past. I covered harassment at Milligan University, and I've talked about in some of my coaching videos too, that I have some experience of this in my past background. This isn't just in soccer coaching. This is coaching in this country in general. There really is this, I don't want to say mentality, but I don't want to say culture because not every coach is like this, but there is a culture of letting people off the hook. So coaches blurring the lines between players, between athletes, coaches, going off the handle, using abusive language, and ultimately, harassing players. And that's where this culture allows this harassment to fester, to build to the point where you're damaging players beyond repair. And that's not okay. And these coaches, they'll get fired, they'll get rehired somewhere as an assistant, they'll do their time, and then they'll have another head coaching gig. Whereas these players, their lives are harmed forever, or take years and years and years of therapy to get to a point where they can talk about it. These coaches didn't just pop up in professional soccer, in professional sports. They were youth coaches, they were college coaches. Rory Dames, we talked about in the Arnhem Whistler video, was the head of the Chicago Eclipse Academy, used that to his advantage. These people rose up through the ranks and along the way had people who were there to enable them every step of the way. Christy Holly worked for U.S. Soccer, was fired from Sky Blue FC, was hired by U.S. Soccer, never had his coaching license, and was still hired by Racing Louisville afterwards, still not having his coaching license. He's not eligible to be suspended by Safe Sport because he never had his U.S. Soccer coaching license, and yet he coached twice in the NWSL. These coaches left damaged players in their wake everywhere they went, but it's like a league-wide, worldwide reckoning. Over 200 players spoke to this investigation, and it's like that and more for them to actually be held accountable, and they're still not being held accountable. Mary Paulson, I'll talk about that in this next section, but he came out today saying he's going to step away from soccer operations and that front office members named in the report will no longer be with the team. That's not good enough. This guy needs to be gone from both leagues, from MLS and NWSL. He has no place in American soccer. We have to question the structures that allowed these players to flourish and use the U.S. soccer pyramid to build their resumes, both leading up to their current NWSL jobs and when they were fired, and in the case of former Racing Louisville coach, was allowed to rehabilitate himself in the U.S. soccer pyramid before Christy Holly was rehired by Racing Louisville. So let's talk about the Portland Thorns and the Portland Timbers. I mentioned Mary Paulson. Paulson he has to sell this team. He has to be gone. He has to be out of here. There are so many occurrences of him lying to players, bearing the abuse, enabling Paul Riley, who coached for the Thorns at one time, saying that Mike Lube and Gavin Wilkinson always had the best interest of players in mind, when so clearly that they didn't. Gavin Wilkinson heavily implicated in this thing, especially talking about Paul Riley, saying Riley was put in a bad position by a player that we now know. Those players that came forward to talk about Paul Riley originally, Gavin Wilkinson said that they were just putting a coach in a bad position and none of their complaints held any water. We know that's not the case. In his emails to Western New York Flash front office, he said he would rehire Paul Riley in a heartbeat. That tells you everything you need to know about this guy. Galoob would also go on to be implicated further, including a specific incident of harassment towards current USSF President Sidney Parlow-Cohn. So the reason why Sidney Parlow-Cohn is probably a little bit gung-ho about this investigation, like I said, she was privy to firsthand account of the general harassment going on. So here's the kind of statement from the report. Mike Galoob, the Portland Thorns and Portland Timbers president of business, created an atmosphere of disrespect, intimidation towards women and working mothers employed at the club over a span of 11 years. Women who left those organizations reported multiple instances of inappropriate comments or jokes in office settings. Unwanted physical contact and hostile behavior, they say, goes beyond the typically demanding atmosphere of working in sports, which is another topic to cover at some point. Sidney Parlow-Cohn reported that in 2013, while serving as coach of the Portland Thorns, Galoob asked her, "What's on your bucket list besides sleeping with me?" Parlow-Cohn told Galoob never to speak to her like that again, and she reports that he did not. Several months later, when she was leaving the Thorns, she reported the incident to Thorns owner Merritt Paulson. Merritt Paulson knew of something all the way back in 2013, which tells you that there had to have been a pattern of behavior even before that. Front office personnel for the Thorns can be heavily involved in the Portland Timbers franchise as well. They're kind of one and the same as far as their structure goes. So it can be a bit frustrating to see MLS and NWSL. It's been a year since allegations came out, and they've put these investigations forth to put no pressure on Merritt Paulson to take a leave of absence, on Gavin Wilkinson to step away. None of that. They were allowed to operate just as they had been up until this point. You can draw your own conclusions on why that would be, but we talked about it in the Arnim Whistler video before. Merritt Paulson was also there at the creation of the NWSL. And even a step further, Portland organizations, both the Thorns and the Timbers, are often, put on a pedestal because of their fan interaction, because of their team success, because of how important Portland soccer is to the general American soccer landscape. However, the league has succeeded in spite of Merritt Paulson, not because of it. His capital, his ability to set up the league, fine, we'll accept that. But the trauma that he has facilitated around the league is simply unforgivable. He has to go. He has to sell the team. So let's talk about Arnim Whistler then. Chicago Red Stars owner protected Rory Dames to the point players stopped bringing their concerns to him. This is what we found in the report. When Arnim Whistler released that statement that we talked about in that video last week, where he said, "I've spoken with many players and experiences they have told me about are unacceptable. I am further heartbroken this week after learning about the allegations of former youth players that were involved with Red Stars' former coach at the youth club he founded. There's no place for abuse of any kind in soccer or anywhere." And we know this is not true. He had heard about this before. He had known about it at least at the earliest 2015 or 2017, and definitely before this all came out last year. Should also be important to note, and I put this out there on Twitter, Sarah Spain is a minority owner in the Chicago Red Stars. She had been under some criticism for not speaking out about Arnim Whistler before. She put out a statement yesterday saying that some things she just can't say because of litigation, and we have to respect that. I put out a tweet saying that Sarah Spain, when she bought in 2021, that was at the same time that Arnim Whistler was still lying about knowing about Rory Dames' actions. USSF would have known about it at this time too, and none of that was disclosed to Sarah Spain when she bought into the team. That's future litigation that is going to be handled in the courts. So it's a complex topic because it sounds like Sarah Spain didn't know, and if she didn't know, she's definitely entitled to something from Arnim Whistler as well. But what came out even further, let's talk about Kristen Press a little bit. So Kristen Press, like I talked about in that video, was Chicago Red Stars player, their kind of all-star, their totem at the time, and had brought her complaints about Rory Dames to Arnim Whistler, of which he largely ignored. And then it came out in the report that he tried to trade her to the Houston Dash. Houston Dash, that was a trade that Kristen Press declined because of this kind of air about Houston, about the Dash organization, that players of color weren't having a good time there. None of that was further investigated here, but I get the rumblings that will be investigated. And Kristen Press turned down that trade and was retaliated against by Arnim Whistler. The report describes Press's grim situation as untenable. Whistler told Bailey that he was not going to waste any more time on this, that the player was using her concerns as window dressing because she wanted more money from an international team or for personal reasons. He went on to note that the team was aggressively exploring trades within the league for her. Those aggressively pursued trades are what facilitated this Houston Dash deal that ultimately fell through because Kristen Press didn't want to go. Arnim Whistler also needs to sell. That's, I think, a given. Let Sarah Spain find a majority owner. Something needs to happen. This guy needs to get out of here. We know this, but let's talk about one we maybe don't know about, and that is Racing Louisville. Racing Louisville FC had been... They've had some issues, let's just say that. But for the most part, you can always look to their ownership of a small market team getting the most out of their market, and the players and the community kind of rallying around that. What we're learning now is that the players haven't been listened to. And despite ownership saying that they're listening to the players, that obviously wasn't true. Racing Louisville FC, Racing Louisville didn't comply with the investigation. They, like I said earlier, obfuscated and didn't allow any of their employees or past employees to talk about their experience at the time with Racing Louisville because of non-disclosure agreements that may or may not have been completely accurate. So the report kicks off with a chilling story of Aaron Simon's time with Racing Louisville. So Aaron Simon played for Sky Blue, was with Houston Dash, and then Racing Louisville picked her up in the expansion draft. They picked her up because Christy Holly had experience with her in the past. She was an open tryout at Sky Blue FC and had trained with him in the offseason. And we kind of learn about that through this report because Holly groomed Aaron Simon. And it started off innocently enough with jokes, with kind of private training sessions, but it would turn into more than that. It would escalate from that to what they call text me challenges, which is where Aaron Simon would have to one-up Christy Holly's texts. And that included explicit images, that included... Just use your imagination there. I don't want to get this taken down by YouTube. Previous playful behavior, joking around, turned into Holly using jokes as an opportunity to grab Simon's breasts. Holly would then send her sexually explicit photos without her asking and demanded that she reciprocate. Aaron Simon had then been hooked by Holly. And by that point, what can you do? If you speak out, you're not going to be picked for the team. And if you're a fringe NWSL player, this is your opportunity in the league. And this is your opportunity to make a living playing soccer. And now all that is in the hands of this abusive coach that has you on the hook. Holly would escalate things further in private film sessions. He would invite her along with other players along, and instead of showing film, would show pornography, and then would also go into further behavior described as the pretense of watching game film. He would then touch her genitals and breasts each time she made an errant pass in the video. In other circumstances, he grabbed and groped her in public, but out of view. And Racing Louisville ownership did nothing about this, and then once it was made public, or once it was brought to their attention, they fired Christie with cause, which at least you can give them that, but then would go on to not let anyone investigate any further. That's coward shit. And that brings me to my conclusion, which is burn it all down. Burn the whole system. It's broken, it's corrupt. We hear stories each and every single day. We've had 3 stories come out this week outside of the Sally Yates investigation of coaches abusing athletes, both at the NCAA level and at the kind of semi-pro level. It's endemic in sports, in women's sports, and frankly, in men's sports too. It's endemic in sports in general. This culture of abuse in coaching, this culture of don't say anything, don't make too much noise, don't be a problem. It's all designed to be abusive to the players, to control the players under your purview. We know that this isn't how you get the most out of your athletes. We know this by now, but it's still seen as the way to coach among a certain section of the coaching population, from youth sports to college sports to the pros. We need to actually come up with something that can be an oversight solution. Safe Sport is great, but Safe Sport doesn't have near the level of resources it needs to do something like this. And even in the case of Rory Dames, for instance, Rory Dames still isn't on the Safe Sport list. They still haven't investigated him. And that's because they don't have the resources, the employees to be able to do it. This isn't the conclusion. This isn't the climax. This is just kind of the rising action. There's still more to come here. And we just have to sit along and do our part, raise our voices, and make sure that these people can't get off scot-free. Be loud. Obfuscate. Do what you have to do. And ultimately, we'll keep on moving. All right, folks. Hope that this video was a bit of an explainer for you. Give me a thumbs up if you liked it. Subscribe if you want to see more content from me. It won't all be like this. It won't all be this heavy. You know that. But anyway, hope you all have a great day, and we'll talk soon. Take a mental health day. Drink water.